Welcome to Lecto. Today we are going to discuss three components of the brain. First one is the ventricle, second is cistern, and third is the foramen. So let's start. First of all, we will see how the meninges of the brain arrange in the brain. So first one is, this is the scalp. This is the portion of the scalp. Then three meninges, dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. So these are the three meninges present in the brain we have discussed in the previous lecture. So this is the dura mater, then arachnoid mater, and last one is the pia mater. So between the pia and the arachnoid matter, there is a space which is called subarachnoid space because it is below the arachnoid matter, and in this space cerebrospinal fluid is present which flow in the brain and the spinal cord. Here is the spinal cord. So first we will discuss the ventricle. Ventricular system in the brain has four components, and here you can see first one is the lateral ventricle. Actually there are two lateral ventricles present in the brain. Second one is the third ventricle, and third one is the aqueduct of Sylvius, and last ventricle is the fourth ventricle. Here you can see this portion is the lateral ventricle. Next is the third ventricle, and here this chamber is actually the aqueduct of Sylvius, and last is the fourth ventricle. So these are basically the ventricular systems of the brain. If I show here, then you can easily understand. Here is the structures of the ventricle. These are the two lateral ventricle, and below lateral ventricle there is a third ventricle. This is the two lateral ventricle and below third ventricle, and then there is a aqueduct of Sylvius. This is the aqueduct of Sylvius, and the last is the fourth ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle. So here are the four components of the ventricular system of the brain. Next we will discuss the cistern. Cisterns are basically the tank which are present in the subarachnoid space. These are the tanks present in subarachnoid space, reservoir or tank, in which the cerebrospinal fluid is present. So we will discuss three cisterns, and first one is the cerebral major vein cistern. Second one is the Cerebello-medullary cistern. Cerebro-medullary cistern, also called, it has another name which is called cisterna magna. This is another name of cerebromedullary sinus. third one is the lumbar cistern, and fourth is the interpeduncular cistern, and last is the Pontis cistern. So these are the 5 cisterns. Here you can see this space is the subarachnoid space. This way, this is the subarachnoid space which is present in the brain, and it will move towards the spinal cord. So here is cerebrospinal fluid present in this space, and it will move in that situation. So this way. So this is the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, and here you can see this is actually the cerebral major vein, and the cistern, here I write it with blue color. Here is the cistern which is present near the cerebral major vein. So on the basis of it, we called it cerebral vein cistern. And next, if we move toward this way, cerebellum, this is actually the cerebellum, and the cistern which is present near the cerebellum, it is called Cerebello-medullary cistern. Here is second cistern. And if we move towards the spinal cord and at the lumbar region, actually there are several regions of the spinal cord: cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, coccyx. So at the lumbar region, there is an other cistern which is present, which is called lumbar cistern. And if we again move upward, then at the level of pons, we will see that there is another cistern which is called Pontis cistern, and above there is another cistern which is called Interpeduncular cistern. So here are basically the 5 cisterns, and it a reservoir of the cerebrospinal fluid, and when required, when there is a deficiency of cerebrospinal fluid, these reservoir give cerebrospinal fluid according to its need. So these are basically the 5 cisterns. Next, if we talk about the foramen, foramens are basically the holes, and the 3 foramens are present. First one is the Foramen of Monro. This is very much important. Foramen of Monro, which is also called interventricular foramen. This foramen is actually present between the lateral ventricle and the third ventricle. So here is the location of Foramen of Monro, or you can say interventricular foramen. Next one is the Foramen of Luschka. Foramen of Luschka. So this is actually present at the upper floor of roof of the fourth ventricle, and it is present this way. It is present here at the upper floor of the fourth ventricle. And last one is the Foramen of Magendie. This is the last, and here you can see this is the which connect the ventricle to the subarachnoid space. So Foramen of Magendie is that foramen which connect the ventricular system to the subarachnoid spaces which surround the brain and the spinal cord. So these are basically the 4 foramen of the brain. So before we discuss how cerebrospinal fluid flow in the brain and the spinal cord, first of all we will see where cerebrospinal fluid is produced from the choroid plexus. But lot of people get confused between the choroid plexus and the Telachoroidea. These are very much confusing terms. So first of all, we will discuss these two terms. Here you can see this is the pia mater. This is the pia mater of the brain. And pia mater surround the, here these are the blood capillaries. These are the capillaries and the pia mater surround these capillaries here like this way. So first of all, pia mater surround capillaries, and this structure, when the pia mater surround blood capillaries, then it is called Telachoroidea. This is the simple way. Folding of pia mater around the capillaries is called Telachoroidea. And if ependymal cell also present, here is the layer of the ependymal cell surround the pia mater. So these ependymal cell basically secrete the cerebrospinal fluid, and this whole structure including the ependymal cell is called choroid plexus. So Telachoroidea and choroid plexus. Next, 3 choroid plexus are present in 3 ventricles. Lateral ventricle has its own choroid plexus, third ventricle has its own, and fourth one has its own ventricle, choroid plexus. So these are basically the, here you can see this choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle, next choroid plexus of the third ventricle, and last is the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. So these choroid plexus are involved in the formation of cerebrospinal fluid. Average 150 ml cerebrospinal fluid is present in the brain, and it produces at the rate of 200 ml per hour. In per 1 hour, it will produce 200 ml. But why it will remain 150? How it can possible? So cerebrospinal fluid will drain into the vein. How? Here you can see these choroid plexus produce the cerebrospinal fluid. Here you can see it will move from the lateral ventricle, then third ventricle, then aqueduct, and then fourth ventricle. It will pass into 2 ways. It will move into the central canal of the spinal cord, and it will move into the subarachnoid space. Here you can see it will move, and it will move in subarachnoid space, and after that it will move all the way to the different whole subarachnoid space. It will move whole the way, and subarachnoid space has arachnoid granulation, and from the arachnoid granulation it will move into the dural venous sinuses, which we have discussed in previous lecture. So from the granulation it will move into the dural venous sinus, and from the dural venous sinus it will ultimately fall into the jugular vein, internal jugular vein, and ultimately into the heart. So it will continuously produce at the rate of 200 ml, and we have to keep 60 to 100 ml millimeter water pressure. Pressure should be 60 to 100 millimeter water, not mercury, maintained in the brain. So actually brain float in the cerebrospinal fluid, and on the basis of this we can't feel the weight of the brain on our neck. So this is the reason why brain float in our skull. So this is all about the ventricles, cisterns and the foramen. So if you have any question, then you may ask in the comment section. Thank you.